Hello and welcome back. In this lecture video, I want to talk about the purpose of being in school. In my face-to-face classes, I start off this lecture with a short group discussion, and I ask students to turn to the person sitting next to them and to literally just talk about what the point of school is. I highly encourage you to pause this lecture video and take just maybe a minute or two to think about that question. What is the point of school? What are you supposed to be learning while you are here? When you're ready to come back, just unpause the video and we can go on. Okay, I'm gonna assume that you took my recommendation, so welcome back. Now, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the purpose of school. Usually when I ask this question to a group of face-to-face students and I solicit some answers, the students tell me various interesting things. Some students tell me that the purpose of school is to learn how to behave in a complex social environment, right? Through the process of being in school, you learn that when you have a disagreement with another child, you are not supposed to bite them or kick them, but instead try to work it out like human beings. That's absolutely an important role. Other students might say things like, well, we go to school to help us get a better job or to help you go on to a post-bachelor program or something if that's what you want. In almost all of the times that I've asked this question and I get answers from students, there is one key unifying principle about what draws all of these ideas together. And that key unifying principle is the point of school is not just to be in school, right? The point of being in school is so that you can get something or do something or achieve something after your time is done here. So to make this a little bit more formal, I want to tell you about ECC's mission. You may not be aware that Elgin Community College has a mission statement, but all colleges do. And it happens to be very similar to my personal mission as an educator. That's actually one of the things that drew me to this place in the first place. The mission statement includes a couple different pieces, and the part that I want to highlight is their philosophy of learning. There's a whole lot of text here, and I'm not going to read all of it to you. I just want to emphasize the last bit. We further believe that learning empowers individuals to improve their lives and the economic, social, and cultural conditions of local and global communities. You may have heard in different communications from ECC that their mission is to improve people's lives through learning. This is what I mean, right? Our goal in school is not to be really, really good at school. Our goal is to go to school to help you get somewhere afterwards, to help your life be better afterwards. The point is to prepare you to succeed outside of the classroom. But how does that happen? It is quite likely that you have taken classes that seem completely irrelevant to your life outside of school. So it is possible, maybe even likely, that you need some convincing that school can actually help you in the real world. My goal with this lecture is to convince you that school actually can help you in your life outside the classroom. So I'm gonna now get a little more concrete, and this is my cat, hi Kitty. I'm now going to get a little more concrete about the goals of school. I want to propose a framework to help you think about the purpose of school. The framework is called Bloom's taxonomy. A taxonomy is a fancy word for a classification system, so don't get too caught up in that terminology. Instead, what I want you to think about is that Bloom's taxonomy is just a way to organize the skills that educators like myself and your other faculty members at Elgin Community College really hope that you will develop in every class that you take. So to put it very concretely, the purpose of being in school is to help you develop the skills of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. I put some definitions of these skills on the slide here, and I'm not going to talk a whole lot about all of them. The reason being, this is the organizing principle of this class, and I'm going to talk a lot about these different skills as they come up in different assignments throughout the semester. So for now, I just want to introduce you to this framework and to tell you about a couple of these skills. I'm going to start with remembering. I think that the presence of this goal in school is probably obvious to you, even if you think back on your previous education. One class where you might see something like this is in a history class. I took U.S. history when I was in high school, and I definitely remember the importance of, well, remembering. I had to sit down and memorize a bunch of dates, names, and important things like events for a test the next day. And to do that, I read a textbook, and then I reread a textbook a lot. Understanding builds a little bit on remembering, right? In remembering, all you're doing is just memorizing, recalling things, and kind of spitting them back out verbatim. Understanding builds on this by asking you to explain something, right? Can you maybe in an essay question explain the significance of a historical event in addition to remembering what actually happened and when it happened and the important people involved, right? So understanding is the ability to explain an idea or a concept. These first two thinking skills of remembering and understanding are foundational, and they're very, very important parts of your education. But if you stop here, if you stop at remembering and understanding, your education will have failed you in a very important sense. Remember on that last slide, I shared that it looks like schools want to prepare you to live your real life outside of the classroom. Outside the classroom, random facts about history are probably irrelevant to your daily life unless you are a professional Trivial Pursuit player or something like that. So what I mean by this is that memory alone, memory for facts, and even the ability to remember an explanation for those facts, is not something that's meaningful to you. By meaningful, I mean significant or impactful in your life outside of a classroom. If all you do is remember some knowledge, but you can't actually use the knowledge, you can't do anything with it other than, say, get a good grade on a test, that knowledge is what researchers call inert. It can't do anything. You can say that you kinda know that content, maybe you would recognize it on a multiple choice exam, but you can't apply the information that you have learned outside of that context. And because you can't apply that information, you can't use that information. So it is by definition useless knowledge. I like to draw a distinction between meaningful and not meaningful learning. Remember and understand are important, but they are by themselves not meaningful learning. The other thinking skills that you see on the slide, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, these are more meaningful thinking skills that are more apparently useful in your life outside the school. I'm going to give you a couple examples of these skills here, but as I said, I'll talk much more about them when we get to them later on in the semester. Applying is the very crucial ability to take something that you've learned in one context and then bring it with you to a new context. For example, if you at some point learned how to calculate 40% of 15 in a math class, then you go to a restaurant and you're able to calculate a 20% tip for your server, that's applying something. I happen to think, and this is backed up by research I did in graduate school, that many classes don't do a great job of making the process of application obvious. The ultimate hope of many educators is that their students will take the knowledge that they learn in the classroom and then apply it somewhere else. This is very, very hard to do as a beginner in a particular subject. You don't know which ideas are most important, you don't know where they are relevant to your life right away, and you don't know how you can actually make those connections between the course content and your life. This is something that I play a large role in. Just to finish up the thinking skills here, so you have a couple of examples. Analyzing is breaking down a complex idea into its constituent parts and looking for relationships between those parts. Evaluating involves justifying a decision or a position, evaluating some evidence. I know I'm using the word in its definition there, but judging the strength and the usefulness of some evidence and proving a point. And then finally, creating. Creating involves producing any kind of original work. This is something that absolutely does happen in art classes, but if you've ever written a paper, you've created something, right? Creating brings your own perspective and your own personal meaning to the forefront. And this is something that I place a lot of emphasis on. In my job, for example, writing a lecture is a creative process. I need to think about the most important ideas I want to convey, which is analysis. I need to apply my knowledge of psychology, and I need to figure out how to put together those pieces into a new product to share with my students. These meaningful learning skills, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, these are called higher order thinking skills. They involve reasoning, problem solving, critical thinking. These are the things that you are hopefully going to agree more readily will be useful to you in your career, regardless of what that career happens to be. You may be thinking, well, Dr. Gray, if this is the whole point of school, why is right now, in this class, in college, the first time I am hearing about it? There are some common mistakes that I believe educators make in their teaching that makes it a little bit difficult to see the purpose of school. The first mistake is focusing too much on remembering. Many of you have likely had the experience of sitting in a class, writing frantically to catch every word that a teacher says because you know it's going to be on the test. If you study those notes, you're probably going to do well on that test. But how much of that information do you actually remember now? If you are like me, the answer is none of that information. If all you do is work hard to remember a bunch of stuff, but you never work with it, you never apply it, you won't remember it for very long. And why would you? It's not proved very useful to you, right? It's not meaningful to your life. You're not practicing any higher order meaningful thinking skills with that information. So your brain is not going to prioritize keeping it around for a long time. Focusing too much on just memorizing information will leave you unable to adapt it to novel situations because you haven't practiced, right? You haven't practiced any of those applications. As a side note here, I think that our education system in the US very frequently rewards this kind of non-meaningful learning, right? You can get pretty good grades in school by just brute force memorizing stuff, not really applying and forgetting things right after the test. The other mistake that I think is quite common is overcorrecting too far in the other direction and ignoring the important role of memory. Some teachers may acknowledge that their students have access to the internet in their pockets. And nowadays you have access to generative artificial intelligence in your pocket. More on that in a little bit. So these teachers know that you can look up facts on your phone in about 10 seconds. So why would they waste time teaching you to remember stuff? Instead, they may say, my goal is to teach my students to be critical thinkers. This is all well and good, but there's a problem. Let's say, for example, you told your friend that you were taking a psychology class, and this friend of yours is having some trouble with anxiety, and they saw on TikTok that something called cognitive behavioral therapy can be used to treat anxiety. They might ask you your opinion. If you haven't done any hard work to remember and understand information, the words cognitive behavioral therapy will mean nothing to you. You'll have to say, okay, hold on one second, let me Google what that is again. But before you finish typing the words cognitive behavioral into Google, your friend is saying, oh, actually, I also heard that something called an SSRI can be used to treat anxiety. What can you tell me about that? And now you gotta Google what SSRI stands for, and then you can Google whether or not it's recommended for anxiety disorders, right? You can kind of see where I'm going here. In the words of a Washington Post journalist, Megan McArdle, you have to have something in your head to think about before you can think, right? So these two common mistakes are, I'm talking about them to encourage you to realize that you need both, right? Memorizing meaningless information doesn't last, and it won't help you if you can't use it. Also, this is important as well, it's super boring, right? Just sitting there and staring at a textbook or staring at flashcards and trying to get something drilled into your head, super, super boring. But you also can't jump straight into those complex thinking and reasoning skills. You need to learn to speak the language of the discipline that you are learning. I actually think that you can't claim to have learned material if you have to look up every little thing, right? At the end of this class, I hope you're going to know what cognitive behavioral therapy is, and I hope you're going to know whether or not it's appropriate for anxiety disorders without just Googling it. Even if you never take another psychology class, and because this is an intro-level class, and I imagine many of you are not psychology majors, many of you probably won't take another psychology class. Even if that's true for you, memory is the building block for all other thinking skills. This is true for your science classes, for your history classes, for everything that you are taking. We actually organize these thinking skills of Bloom's taxonomy in a beautiful rainbow pyramid shape to make this point. In order to get to those higher level thinking skills at the top of the pyramid, creating, evaluating, analyzing, and applying, you first need to master the lower level skills, right? In order to explain connections between ideas, understanding, you first need to remember the ideas. In order to apply ideas to a new situation, like applying what you learned about anxiety disorders to your friend's situation, you first need to remember what anxiety disorders are, you need to remember what cognitive behavioral therapy is, and you need to be able to understand how cognitive behavioral therapy works, right? These are all skills that build on one another. So how does this class work with all of that in mind? Let's compare your job as a student with my job as a teacher. Your job is represented in that dark black triangle, and my contribution is represented in the upside down lighter blue triangle. You can see that your contribution is very large for remembering and understanding. That's because that is largely your job. There's very little that I can do to make you remember stuff better. I can present the material to you, and rest assured, I absolutely will do this, but it is a waste of your extremely valuable time if I read the textbook to you. So, how do you do this? How do you remember and understand? This course is set up to give you the tools to help you remember and understand on your own. First, read the textbook. I cannot emphasize this enough. Reading to learn is hugely, hugely important in my class, and I imagine in many of your other college level classes. So you will remember and understand on your own by reading the textbook, watching lecture videos, and taking quizzes. The quizzes are written to help you as a learning tool. Take them earlier in the week so that you can figure out what you know and what you don't know. Ask questions about what you don't understand so that I can help you with this remembering and understanding component. My job, on the other hand, is greater for those higher order thinking skills. So what that means is I will spend a lot more of my time and effort demonstrating how to create things, how to evaluate, analyze, apply, etc., and giving you examples on which you can model your own attempts to practice those thinking skills. So what is my role in content delivery / helping you remember and understand? Lectures in this class are going to follow something that I call the extra principle. I will record lectures and they will focus on one or more of three things, right? Three different definitions of extra. Number one, material from textbook reading that is extra important. So for example, research methods, oh my gosh, so important. So you are going to watch several videos related to research methods to emphasize those concepts and to help you actually get something out of them. Second, material from your textbook that is extra difficult. For example, classical conditioning. I have been teaching this class for many years, and I know from experience that students find classical conditioning very, very challenging. So I have a lecture video to help you understand that concept better. And finally, extra material that didn't fit into the textbook, but is still important. Whenever you see a just plain extra lecture video, I'm going to be clear about how much of that extra material will be on exams and in what form. So for example, although this lecture video is, I believe, very important, it's not in the textbook and it's not going to be on the exam. Hope you're still with me. Okay, so with all of this in mind, let's take another look at the list of course requirements that you have to complete. I hope you've already looked at this in the syllabus or maybe even in the first week's content area, but here are here are many of the things that you are going to be completing this semester. You have on the left-hand side here in those dark boxes, remembering and understanding. This is what you can do to remember and understand on your own. You can take the practice quizzes, and that will help you complete self-reference assignments, which you'll watch a lecture video about next week. Self-reference assignments are also going to help you remember and understand, so that will in turn help you do better on the practice quizzes. Both of these assignments, the goal of them is to help you remember and understand, which will lead to better exam performance. Now, all of these things will help you with the more meaningful learning that you see in the light blue box. So things like the short projects or the Bloom's taxonomy projects that you're going to complete, engaging in discussions on the discussion board. You actually don't have group activities in this class. That is a typo. This should be that should say the psychology in the wild assignments. But all of those things that you're going to be completing involve meaningful learning, so higher order thinking. Okay, bye, cat. Every assignment that I give you is designed to help you build one or more of these thinking skills. A big part of my philosophy as a teacher is that you should always know why you are doing what you are doing. I do not write these assignments just for fun, just to give you busy work, just to give you things to do. Everything that you do in this class, and yes, I mean everything, has a purpose. I am not going to sit here and pretend that knowing the motivation or the purpose behind the course activities will magically make them more fun. Probably not. But I do hope that knowing the motivation will help you see that it's not pointless. It's not busy work. And I think that will make them easier to complete. Okay, to end here, I actually want to shift a little bit and bring in the role of generative artificial intelligence. Right, so now that I've talked a bit about the purpose of school, it's to help you develop those 6 thinking skills: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, right? Let's briefly consider the role of generative AI. Now, I am going to talk way more about generative AI in a future lecture, but for now I just want to introduce it to you in case you don't know what it is or how it works. Generative AI is any tool that generates some content in response to a prompt from the user, which would be you or me or anyone who's using these things. That includes things like ChatGPT, Snap AI, Google Gemini, some tools in Chegg and Grammarly, and according to the last time I opened my Jewel-Osco app to place an order for delivery, Jewel-Osco also has a generative AI. So there we go. So how these tools work, I understand them at a very high level, but I don't understand the details. It's way too complicated. So let me just give you this high level. These artificial intelligences are trained on huge, unimaginably huge amounts of text data. And these AIs learn patterns in language. They take input from the user, they analyze the pattern of words that is in that input, and they use a complicated text predicting algorithm to generate the most likely response to that input. It is, in essence, autocomplete on steroids. You know, when you are on your phone and you're going somewhere, to your friend's house maybe, and you open up your messages app and you start to type "on my," your phone autocompletes with "way," right? It's like that. Your phone knows when you type "on my," it's very likely that the next word is going to be "way." With generative AI, instead of completing a sentence with a single word or a phrase, it's completing, in scare quotes, your sentences with full sentences and paragraphs. I'm going to be honest, I think it's a pretty amazing tool. I think it can do some very, very cool stuff. I'll give you one example and a couple other ideas in a few minutes, and we'll talk more about what it can do in later lectures. But it does have some important limitations. Again, we'll talk much more about the limitations in future classes or in future lectures, but I want to just say a couple things about them now. The first limitation is that it is trained on internet text data. So for example, a part of its training data is reliable stuff like Wikipedia and New York Times articles, which actually gets into another limitation, which is the copyright issues that are involved with generative AI, but it's for another day. However, because it's trained on internet text data, it also includes some less reliable stuff like people's personal blogs and Reddit. And I'm sure you are aware of this, but people post dumb, biased crap on the internet. For example, when I was teaching abnormal psychology, I asked ChatGPT to generate a case study of a middle-aged white woman with generalized anxiety disorder. And it did a great job, right? Developed this person's backstory, talked about their symptoms, and some reasons why they were experiencing these symptoms in their life. Then I took that prompt and I changed one word. Instead of a middle-aged white woman, I asked it for a middle-aged Hispanic woman. ChatGPT complied. It generated that case study for me. But now, instead of generating something that I was generally fine with, it made this woman an undocumented immigrant. I didn't ask ChatGPT to do that, but it did that anyway. Why? Well, because I said it is trained on internet text data. any garbage that is present in that training data, like people posting biased, mean, stereotypical, hurtful things on the internet, that's going to appear in the training data that will be reproduced in whatever it gives you as output, right? So this actually leads into another important limitation of ChatGPT. ChatGPT doesn't know everything. It might act like it might talk like it, but it doesn't know everything. In fact, it doesn't know anything. There is no hard knowledge base coded into ChatGPT or any generative AI. It actually has no evaluative capability whatsoever. It cannot tell whether something is true or false. If you ask it, can you tell me whether something is true or false? It will act like it can, but based on how it actually works, how the algorithm actually works, it's just doing text prediction, right? It omits things, it might present things in a biased way, and you wouldn't know what it's omitting or whether or not it has a bias unless you double checked everything that it tells you and or you're an expert in a particular domain, right? So those are two limitations. I'm going to talk about a third limitation. And this third limitation has to do with the purpose of this lecture. What is the purpose of school? What's the point of school? I do believe that in this class, you can use generative AI ethically to enhance your learning. There are several ways you can do this, right? You can use it to help you overcome writer's block. You can use it to proofread something that you are writing, or if you are not sure if you got something, if something that you've written flows properly, you can ask it to provide some feedback. You can also use it as a private tutor with endless patience. You can use it to suggest study materials, write quiz questions or test questions or practice essay questions for you. You can even upload my syllabus. Please delete my personal contact information if you do this. And ask it questions about the course, like when is the first exam or when is quiz 3, right? And it can search through that document and help you find what you are looking for. However, I want to encourage you to be careful not to go too far with using AI. Specifically, do not allow it to replace you. I imagine most people would agree that we don't want to let AI take things from us if those things are central to your identity. For example, you probably don't want to let AI decide for you who your friends should be. I know I certainly don't, right? Because my friends are a big part of who I am. I don't want to let AI make that decision. I get to decide who my friends are. I get to decide how and where I spend my time. I imagine for most of you, a skill like writing, probably not central to your identity, unless you want to be a writer someday. If you want to be a journalist, an author, or have a career where writing is really important to you, your voice and your craft is probably crucial to who you are. If you're not a psychology major, psychology is probably not central to your identity, probably not important to who you are as a person. And for things like that, maybe it seems reasonable to offload that work onto a generative AI, right? Maybe you find some of that work difficult, boring, etc., not important to who you are. So sure, that seems like something that's okay for an AI to do for you. But if you let it do your work for you, even work that you deem not important, I want to argue that you are, in a sense, allowing it to replace you. And I want to further argue that this is a problem, even if the things that you're offloading do not seem central to who you are. What's the point of school, right? One of the major reasons why this is important, this limitation that Gen AI can replace you, are very practical and economic job-related consequences. If you let AI replace you now while you're in school, What happens when you are done with school? Why will an employer hire someone if they can just get a robot to do that same job for free, right? You need to find some way to distinguish yourself from that robot. You need to be able to do more or to do things differently than that AI. That's daunting, right? If you've ever used a Gen AI, you may come away with the idea that it's all-knowing, it's highly competent. The newest model of ChatGPT seems to be able to write like someone with a PhD in virtually any topic. As a person with a PhD in cognitive psychology that went to school for 6 years to earn that degree, that's scary to me, right? To imagine that a robot can mimic something that I could produce in seconds when it took me 6 years to earn that level of expertise. So what's the point of school in a world in which AI can write these PhD level essays? What value does school add? Well, you don't go to school just to go to school, right? To go way back to that mission statement from the beginning. Our goal here at ECC is to improve your life through learning. You're not here at ECC just to be here, to produce essays, to get A's on those essays. You go to school for what happens afterwards, because you hope that somehow, while being here, something will happen that will make you able to get a better job, to live a better life after you are done. Maybe another way to think about this is, what is the product of your education? I'm going to talk more about this and share some data later, but the product of your education is not your grades. Increasingly, employers do not care about what grades you are getting in college. It's not even your degree. We in the United States have a huge underemployment problem. If you know any recent graduates, you might actually know someone who is being impacted by this underemployment problem. Entry-level jobs are extremely difficult to get right now, and many students, or many previous students with college degrees, are employed in jobs that don't require a college degree. That's what I mean by underemployment. So what are we actually doing here? What is the point of being in school? I would argue that you are the product of your education, right? It's not your grades, and your degree alone is not enough to guarantee you that better job. It is you. It is the skills that you gain. It is the knowledge that you gain. It is the ability to work together in groups, etc. All of this ethical, moral, knowledge-related development that you undergo while you are at a college or an institution, that's the product of your education. That's what you're going to get afterwards. And if you don't use generative AI wisely, if you don't use it ethically, you are going to be, basically cheating yourself out of that opportunity, right? Many professors, including me, believe that students learn to think through learning to write. There's now more and more scientific evidence that seems to suggest that this is the case, but I'll talk about that scientific evidence in a future video because this is already running long. I want to close by talking about how you can use generative AI ethically and wisely in this class. First, one example. Let's imagine you are reading Module 2 in your textbook and you come across this section. Actually, this might be Module 1. I don't remember. Forgive me. You come across this section that says science relies on rigorous observation. You read that section and you're like, I don't really understand what rigorous means. You can take this section of the textbook, copy and paste it into ChatGPT, and then say, I am reading a textbook for my Introduction to Psychology class, and I need help understanding something. The section I'm reading is about key properties of science. I'm going to give you the passage, and then I want to ask you a question about it, right? Your question might be something like, I don't understand what the word rigorous means in this context. Can you explain it to me and give me an example, right? Then, hopefully, the idea is you're going to use the AI to develop your own understanding, to enhance your own abilities, rather than just having it do your work for you. So, last thing, what is the generative AI policy in this class? Unless I explicitly tell you otherwise, you are allowed to use generative AI on open-ended and other written assignments if you follow a few guidelines. First, the work needs to be essentially your own, not essentially the artificial intelligence's. I know that this might be something with a bit of a fuzzy line, so if you're ever not sure whether something is in essence your own or is in essence the AI's, please ask me. But there are a couple of things that you can do to make something more your own rather than the AI's. First, you have to substantially alter the output, right? I don't care what ChatGPT thinks about something, I care what you think. So that means personalize it, right? If AI gives an example, replace that example with something from your life to make it yours, not the AI's. I also want you to evaluate it, right? So when the AI tells you something, is that actually true? Correct any mistakes that you see and explain anything in your own words that is, you think, mischaracterized or not clear. Next, you need to use the language of the textbook and the course materials. If the AI uses a term that is not present in the course materials, then that's, even if technically correct, that is not something that I will count as correct because that is plagiarism. You're using that term from another source and not citing that source. So always change the terms of the AI output into something that we use in the textbook or in lectures. Finally, very, very importantly, you need to cite this as a source. You can use the AI attribution table. I'm going to provide a link to this in the syllabus, also on Discord and in D2L, to help you actually organize your citation of the AI. And then finally, remember, I'm here to help. As you'll find out later as we go on this semester, I'm pretty excited about the possibilities with ChatGPT, and I really want to work with you to learn how you can use it to make you stronger, right? That is really my goal. My goal is to help you achieve your goals outside of ECC. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.